The race for president of the United States was already tumultuous, but now the fight over a U.S. Supreme Court vacancy is shaking up the race even more. Let's talk about it with our political panel. Joining us, Doug Hattaway is a Democratic strategist, former Gore campaign national spokesman, former senior advisor to Hillary Clinton's 2008 presidential campaign. He's joining us here in Washington. Also joining us from New York, our CNN political commentator, Tara Setmayer. Tara, first of all, Republicans are betting, at least a lot of them, that this Supreme Court vacancy will galvanize the party, help them politically. Is that a risky bet?
Not necessarily. I think that given the makeup of the court, given what a larger-than-life conservative stalwart Scalia was, I think that we have candidates other than Donald Trump and a couple of others, but most of our candidates can articulate the importance of the Supreme Court. And I think that they can use that effectively as an issue this time. Normally it's not. They don't think that Supreme Court justices is really a sexy issue during a campaign season, but this is not a conventional campaign season. Losing a Supreme Court justice at this point hasn't happened in a while. So I think that Republicans can effectively leverage this, highlighting the seriousness of electing the next president of the United States, and that doesn't bode well for necessarily like a Trump.
And Doug, the Democrats can certainly leverage this debate as well, make this a big issue going into the presidential election.
I think so, too. I agree. It would actually really drive up the importance of the Supreme Court in the election, particularly for the base. You know, people really pay a lot of attention. But I think there's a risk here for Republicans in the larger narrative, and it's this kind of obstructionism of getting in the way of the president doing his job, of the Senate doing their job to confirm nominees. People want the government to work. And one of the problems the Republicans have had is the narrative that through government shutdowns and other things like this, their obstructionism puts partisan politics ahead of the greater good of the country. I think that's the risk for them here, and Democrats should be driving that message.
All right, go ahead and respond to that, Sarah.
Yeah, well, the problem here for Republicans is only if they don't message it correctly. I mean, Democrats have done this plenty of times before. Senator Barack Obama joined in a filibuster against Samuel Alito when he was up for the Supreme Court position, which he ultimately won. Chuck Schumer, he's another one. He's coming out saying, oh, we've got to push it through. The president has a right to get his nominee. Yeah, but Chuck Schumer was the first person to say, with 18 months to go in Bush's term, that he doesn't deserve to have another Supreme Court justice. We can't allow a third person be nominated by George Bush, God forbid. So if the Republicans point out the hypocrisy on the other side, then I think they can win the argument. I mean, the Article 2 in the Constitution says, yes, the president has the right to nominate, but with the advice and consent of the Senate. It doesn't say that the Senate has to approve anybody. So if they make the argument and understand, and for the American people to understand the importance of waiting until the next term, I think that they can win that.
You've heard the argument.
It should be about the Constitution.
Yeah, Doug, you've heard the argument several times that the Democrats in this particular case are being hypocritical because if the shoe were on the other foot, they would be doing what a lot of the Republicans want to do right now. Your response to that?
Yeah, that's not a new storyline in Washington, is it? But I think back to my point, the step to the larger narrative about obstructionist Republicans in Congress, in this case, shortchanging the Supreme Court when there are a lot of important cases that are important to the lives of the American people before it. I think they're in a risky position that they could have a Democratic president and a Democratic Senate during this next year. They also have the prospect of cases coming up. It's a bit of a mixed bag, but there are cases coming up from lower courts that would stand if there is a tie that Republicans, conservatives won't like. So I think there's plenty of dynamics here. But if Democrats keep focusing on what has been a problem for Republicans consistently, the narrative and the reality that they actually don't want government to work for the greater good, for the benefit of the American people, this is yet another example of blocking government from doing what it's supposed to do. And shortchange the Supreme Court, holding it hostage for a year, that sort of thing, that's taps right into that narrative that people really find discomforting about the way Republicans have comported themselves in Washington.
And Doug just telegraphed what the Democrats are going to do. We're going to hold the Supreme Court hostage and use that kind of hyperbolic language when that's not actually what we're necessarily doing. The court can actually run, it can function just fine if there's only one justice short. The Supreme Court actually has a choice to hold over important cases if they want to. The Supreme Court runs pretty much its own ship if it wants to. The Constitution says that it only needs to have one Chief Justice. The Congress decides how the makeup of the court in every other instance. So they've done, justices have recused themselves before when there's only been 8 justices in a case. So there are ways for the Supreme Court to continue to function just fine, one Supreme Court justice short. But we cannot allow the other side and people like Doug to use language like that and not hit back hard with our counter argument to show that that's not what we're doing. And this is why waiting in the best interest of the American people and the tradition
American people voted
of Supreme
twice
Court
for
nominees.
President Obama. He's doing his job. The Senate needs to do their job.
That's right. And the Senate's
process.
job is to advise and consent. And if the president puts up a nominee that's not a consensus nominee, then it's the Senate's job to block it. That's why we have a balance in government.
All right, guys, we're going to continue this debate, presumably for months and months and months. Guys, thanks very, very much. Coming up, CNN gets exclusive access to the front lines of Syria's battle against ISIS. We're going there. We'll take you there.